Welcome, my friends, to the podcast that never ends, where we gather our clan and talk about peace and love in our lives, the difficulties along the journey, and how we rise up. We will experience a little thing I call Kluberty together, find our sweet spot, and planting our seeds to watch them grow in our magic garden. I'm Uncle Dave, and our transformation starts right here. Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Today we're going to bring on Adrian Emery. He's from down under, but man, we're going to have so many things that are going to lift us up, and you know how we always love to be uplifted. How are you doing, I guess, this morning, Adrian?
Yeah, it's early morning here, and it's a beautiful sunny morning, although it's chilly. It's the middle of winter. I'm fantastic. Thank you very much, and really looking forward to our conversation, Dave. And thank you very much for having me on your show. I particularly like the bring a bat concept because I think you can't just have peace and love. You've also got to be able to discern and know the truth. And also, I think sometimes you can only really know and define what is by knowing its opposite, its negation. And the power of no is really important, which I guess is what you mean by bring a bat or sock it to them.
Yeah, bring a bat isn't really about the violence, but it is about that balance, because we can't only have peace in our lives. We would like that, but we also have to know where our boundaries are. And when you swing a bat, you want to do the best that you can to hit your sweet spot, that special spot on the bat that really allows you to soar to the next level. And with knowing that your boundaries, you know what your non-negotiables are, and doesn't matter. I also love that I come from New York, and I love the baseball references, though I'm allowing people to see it differently.
Yeah, interestingly, in the new book that I've just written, Dao Tuning, which is all about finding that balance of yin and yang, and one of the chapters is what I call permissible zone of variance. So if you go too far on any extreme, it always brings about the opposite. So as you say, finding that sweet point, finding the balance, the Buddhist middle path is always so important in life, rather than oscillating from one extreme to another and getting very anxious.
Sure, and that's the real challenge is that oscillation. You know, it doesn't flow right. That yin yang is really not just a constant. It's not just there's a line. That's why it moves. It curves. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that and about your book? Because I really was interested to hear about the Dao Tuning.
Yeah, Dao Tuning is a word that I created, and I'm calling it the art of flow. So the reason I came up with the word Dao Tuning is it is exactly the same as fine-tuning your television or tuning in to get clear reception on a radio station, or like us having to tune into each other to have a good conversation. We all know how frustrating it is when you've got a lot of static or interference, or you can't see or you can't hear. I believe that if we have a lot of confusion and noise in our minds, then we can't have the clarity to enjoy a peaceful life. Dao tuning is an individual personal process of spiritual attunement for us to find our path, our way, our Dao, and to have that clarity, that joy, that peace, and that understanding.
Okay, is that I'm going to assume, and it's about Taoism, right? It's about the belief of everything's living and the flow of energies through every living being.
Yeah, look, when I was young, I really wanted to create a better world, a better society, as I know most of us do want to do that. So I set about studying all the philosophies, religions, worldviews that I could possibly find. And the one that I found made the most sense was Daoism. I don't say I'm a Daoist, but I do believe that there is this flow, this wave, this chi, whatever you want to call it, that flows through the universe. And the interesting thing about Daoism is that it says that one needs to go within, that you need to find your own inner truth, what works for you. There are absolutely no rules in Daoism except to be true to yourself. And so it's a very pragmatic and practical philosophy as opposed to most religions. So I think it's really important to start with simplicity, which is we all want our lives to be successful. We all want to be happy. and we all want our lives to work. So there's a functionality there. We all know, I say we have blue sky days like I've got right now behind me, which is going to be a beautiful day. And we all have days which are a bad hairdo day, where things just don't work. So there's a functionality to life that I think we've lost. It's interesting that WHO has just declared that loneliness and depression is the #1 pandemic in the world. Something is definitely not working for us right now, even though we live in the most affluent society that has ever existed. And Dao tuning is a process whereby we can come back and find that middle, that flow, that peace, that understanding that basically our lives work functionally.
Well,
And I
how
think
would
that,
go ahead.
sorry, just let me finish that. I think that the flow, getting on the flow, getting on your wave is the key to both success and to happiness.
That was what I was going to ask. So how do we do that, right? It sounds easy. Like when I talk about my practice and I call it on the path, and I go
Yeah.
personal attitudes towards happiness. Oh, it sounds pretty easy, right? I just got to do that. But how do we do it? Because that flow, what would be one way that you suggest as we just dive into this? You've been doing this for a while.
Over 50 years. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
taken me 50 years to put this together, and I still consider that I'm a novice. And that's the other interesting thing about the Tao, is that there is no catechism, there is no rule book, there is no commandments. It basically says that you need to experience life and learn from your life about how life works. But to
Mm.
go back to your question about the flow, and that's why I wrote the book, is that it's interesting that the and I think the answer to your question is, the first thing is that to be in the flow, we need to be in the present. And that is probably one of the hardest things to do. I like to call it, we all know that every single device has an IP address. We all have a residential address. So I also say we have an IP address, meaning our inner personal address,
Mm.
which means, where do you spend most of your time? Where do you reside? And most of us spend most of our time either in the past or the future, or somewhere where we are not, meaning not being right here now. So I think that's the first step. I call it being now. You've got to be in the present to get on that wave, to be in that flow. And that means quietening the mind, being able to go within, being able to become acquainted with yourself, to know who you are, to find that law, to get on that wave which is within you. So you can't get it from anywhere else or from any book or anything else. You need to turn within, spend some quiet time by yourself to really become acquainted with who you are.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds so easy. When I was learning a lot of things, how do you surrender? And when I spoke to my mentor, he was like, "You just surrender," and I go, "But how?" And it's easy. So how do you find yourself? They talk about it so much, but it's not always easy because we sometimes run from ourselves or run to other things that then leaves us behind.
I think there are two really important points here. First of all, most people consider flow to be an occasional event that happens in an extreme situation. In other words, rock climbing or extreme sport, but I believe what I'm calling it is the zone of flow. I think we need to spend most of our time there. We need to live there. And the other thing is that you can only experience flow if you live in the zone of flow. So, how does one live one's life in that zone? And I've created a PDF that if people sign up to my newsletter, they get a free PDF of the 7 principles of flow. So I'll just go through them very quickly to try and answer your question, which is, and the first thing is to define the flow. So I define the flow as the forward thrust of evolution moving through eternity. The forward thrust of evolution moving through eternity. Now, what I mean by that is, we all know about the Big Bang. And if you can imagine that throwing a pebble into a pond, you create ripples, circles that go out. So that Big Bang created waves. That wave, those waves going through the universe, is the flow. Each one of us as our own individual wave, our own individual law, our own individual path. So to find that, first of all, we need to live with conscious awareness. We need to be aware of what's going on. And quite often, too many of us are asleep or in ignorance. Two, we need to live in harmony with universal law, which can be a big problem because a lot of us don't want to acknowledge that there is a universal law that goes through the universe. The third is the one that you said about your mentor and surrender. I like to call it acceptance. We need to accept what is. One of my principles or saying is, what is equals is. In other words, there's no point in fighting it. You can't change anything unless, first of all, you accept it. And that acceptance or that surrender is not to be confused with complacency or any sort of inertia. It's quite the opposite, because you can only have agency. In other words, you can only have the power to change something once you accept it. If you're in denial, if you don't realize that it is, you have no power to change it. So acceptance, surrender, going with the flow is a really important concept. The next one is the law of your being. As we've both said, we do have a law. We do have this power, this energy that is within us, and we need to get on that wave to ride it. Being true to yourself, I think, is probably the most important one, because the opposite of flow is resistance. So if you are in denial, if you're in doubt, if you're in self-deprecation, if you are in self-sabotage, any of a number of these things that we do, then you can't be accepting yourself.
I
The
just
next
asked a
one is the
question
joy.
about that. Because sometimes we don't know we're in self-sabotage, or because sometimes the behaviors we're doing, we think we're doing it correctly, though it might not be feeling correctly for others. How would we be able to identify that?
Look, that's a really good question, Dave. I have created a model that I call the corporate structure of consciousness. Now, what I mean by that is we have many voices. So we are normally, and most of us are used to what I call the linear, rational left brain, which is the logic, the ego. But we also have an intuition. We also have gut feeling. We also have a higher consciousness. So we have all these different inner voices that talk to us. But unfortunately, in the Western world, in our upbringing, in our education, we've been taught to doubt, to disregard, not to listen to all those other voices, not to listen to our feelings, not to listen to our intuition, not to trust those gestalts of awareness that I like to say are like pearls of wisdom. Have you ever had the experience? We all have, where, for example, you're trying to remember somebody's name, or you can't remember where you put your keys, and you think about it, or you're trying to make a decision. Then once you forget about it and you just go into silence, all of a sudden it's like this thing pops in, and that's right, that's where I put my keys, or that's that person's name, or that's the answer to my problem. Thinking at the inner dialogue is very important, that we're not just totally always in our left brain. And so we need to distinguish those different voices. Look, logic, rational, linear thinking is very important. You and I would not be able to be having this Zoom conversation if we weren't able to negotiate time and place and computers, etc. But similarly, it is not the only way that the mind works. The mind works much more efficiently via intuition and what I call gestalts of awareness. The answer to that question is to, once again, go within, befriend yourself, learn to understand the different voices and recognize them. For example, we all have families, we all have loved ones, we all have close friendships. And we only need to pick up the phone, even though these days with smartphones, the name is there. But if it wasn't, you do recognize most of your friends or loved ones' voices immediately, as soon as you pick up the phone. So similarly, by befriending our inner self, we can learn to recognize the voice of our intuition. So I believe that if you will know when you are self-sabotaging, you will know when you are in denial, you will have, and it's not only a voice, you need to learn to recognize where it is within your gut, within your visceral body, Might be in your gut, might be in your heart, might be somewhere where you go, oh, I'm not really feeling good about that. So it's a matter of honoring. I like to say, you think about it, if you have someone that is constantly ignoring you or not acknowledging you, you very quickly stop talking to them. And it's the same with your intuition. If you do not listen and acknowledge what your intuition is saying to you, then it will very quickly stop talking to you. So by honoring the self, by listening, by obeying, and by executing, meaning doing it. One of my favorite sayings is, how many times on a sunny day your intuition says to you, take an umbrella? Oh, I don't need an umbrella. It's not going to rain. And then it rains. So obedience is important, listening and acting.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing is to listen and act. That's where we sometimes are too logical in that, oh, that can't be right. But when we listen to our the flow within ourselves, the deep down energy that's there, some of it might be fear. And that's why we need to know about our self-awareness and what we want to go and how we want to manage that as well.
Yeah, I like to talk about what I call an acausal universe. One of the big problems with linear logic is that we believe that A causes B. And it's interesting, it brings me to another point that I think is really important, is what I call a paradigm shift. Humanity is going through a massive paradigm shift. And to understand that, we need to look at what is the paradigm that we are in now. And to understand that, we need to go back about 500 years to three giants of the Western world, which are Isaac Newton, Rene Descartes, and Francis Bacon. Now, between the three of them, they really created the paradigm that we live in now, which was all called about the world, they were called the rationalists, the scientific method. Everything had to be proved by logic. You couldn't trust your intuition. You couldn't trust feeling. Everything had to go through that scientific process of being proven. Yet it was, in a lot of ways, it has, over the 500 years, it has proved to be very destructive because it operates via the principle of division. We take things apart to understand how they work. And so we've lost this holistic perspective of life, which is where we're moving. So I like to say that we are moving from a paradigm of separation into a paradigm of oneness or singularity, where we have a much better understanding and feeling of the wholeness and the holistic, the wholeness of life.
I am really glad that you're enjoying the show, and I hope you follow us on all the podcast hosting sites, as well as Facebook, Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat, or you can follow me, Uncle Dave, David Chemetsky, at Facebook, Instagram, Clubhouse, and www.davidchemetsky.com. I also would enjoy for you to contact me if you want to just have some feedback. You need somebody to talk to at peacelovebringabat@gmail.com. Love to hear your feedback. Thanks.
So there are a number of erroneous beliefs that have, I think, quite deliberately been manipulated upon us, because you've got to remember that society and humanity is much easier to rule if we are compliant, if we are dosed, particularly in the modern world of mass and social media, where we are all really being influenced by a false narrative every day to just comply, to be docile, to be compliant, to be the same, to be clones. It's a very destructive process of individuality and personal sovereignty.
Yeah, that's how society has generally been built on stay within the norms, conform to what the beliefs are, and don't question it. Sit down, shut up, and is one of the ways we sometimes learn. Now, so I know you have created something that also you've created a lot of things over the years, but the Temple of Understanding. So going through all of these learnings and putting it into a different level of understanding to manage through society. And for each individual, it's going to be a little bit different, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think it's really interesting. You guys right now are going through such an exciting time with this election. It's every day there's another twist. I have a blog and I try to keep it fairly spiritual, but I do believe, as you just said, that we need to have this higher perspective. You can't just dwell on the election or what's happening in the wars and all the rest of it. One needs to be able to try and have a larger cosmic perspective, and also a little bit of a good sense of humor about it all, or it does become a
Sure.
little bit depressing
Yeah.
and distressing. So for me, the temple of understanding is, okay, how did we end up in this mess? I do say humanity is in deep trouble. How did we get there? What happened? And so I believe that we live within a giant misunderstanding, going back to this paradigm, and that humanity, but I'm very optimistic. I believe that we are going through, as I said before, this massive spiritual awakening, but whereby we are going to transit from this misunderstanding that we live in into the understanding, into a new world.
Right.
So the temple of understanding is all about, okay, what is the misunderstanding? What are its ingredients? And therefore, what is the understanding? Because wisdom and understanding go together. If you think about everything, the mere fact that you and I are able to have this conversation comes about because scientists somewhere understood so many principles of electricity and telecommunication and electromagnetism to put together computers and all of this stuff that we take for granted. But unfortunately, we haven't done the same inwardly with our
Mm.
spirituality. We've been very good at looking out. We've study everything from the stars down to microscopic particles. But the really interesting thing is that nuclear physics, coming back to Daoism for a minute, is that nuclear physics and what those scientists learnt and discovered about the nature of reality completely verifies what the ancient mystics said. Because in our paradigm, what I call the atomistic paradigm, we've been looking for 2,500 years for this atom, for this billiard ball, for this indivisible particle that makes up matter, only to discover now, after 2,500 years, that there are no billiard balls. There is no mechanical universe. It is actually made of waves, of particles that are both particles and waves at the same time, that there is no absolute time or space, according to Einstein, the theory of relativity, and that there are only probability patterns. The Temple of Understanding is my humble attempt put together, and there are 3 titles in that. The first is personal sovereignty, because I think it's very important that we honor who we are, that we learn to listen to ourselves, that we have the courage to make our own decisions, to think for ourselves. Critical thinking is almost disappearing in this age of misinformation and false narrative to just lead us down the garden path. So personal sovereignty, I think, is the first step whereby we really need to learn to think for ourselves. And as we have both said, to listen to our inner guidance and our intuition. The second, which is the one I'm releasing now, Dao Tuning, goes, okay, once I've made a decision about where I want to go or what I want to do, who I want to be, how do I execute that? So Dao Tuning is that ability to live your life successfully. I call my philosophy life works because when I was very young, I thought easy to be a capitalist, easy to be a mystic. I wanted to be a mystical capitalist and a capitalistic mystic, meaning I wanted to find a spirituality that worked, that was practical. I wanted to run businesses that were based in spiritual principles. And so I think it's very important that we bridge this divide between spirit and matter, inner and outer, mind and body. Really, there is no division. It is all one. And we need to start living our lives holistically.
Yeah, and I
And
think
then
that's the balance. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
the third title is becoming one, which means that's like putting it all together and realizing that all of life is sacred, that we live within a holistic universe that has principles and laws that govern the way that it works.
Reading your bio and the information, and then also how you talk about quantum shifts. I work with quantum codes, And because it's about moving that energy. And if you align some of the codes that they've done some research on, you can heal yourself as well as heal others. And it really goes back to that energy when we align ourselves in a certain way, thinking about it and as well as doing it and taking some action behind it. What are some actions that you would recommend for others to take upon themselves?
I think you've just hit the nail on the head. I think the first one is to take agency, meaning to realize that you are in control. You are creating your own reality. And as you say, once you can get down to that quantum level of really understanding the flow, you are generating the flow. You are the captain of your own ship. You are the master of your own destiny. So it's all really an understanding of whether you are in power, or as I say, in agency, or whether you are powerless. Unfortunately, once again, in the old paradigm, we have been taught that we were born in original sin, that we're not good enough, that we need to earn this salvation via the grace of God, that life is a means to some end in another afterlife or in another place. And so I think that the most important actions that one can take is, first of all, to realize that you were not born in original sin. You were born in primal innocence. And if we look at a newborn baby, do we see something that is basically corrupt and has to be purified via society? Or no, we see the most beautiful, innocent, childlike smile, laugh, happiness, which goes away over time. So I think if we go back and really understand that we were born in I call it the divinity of the self. The first thing that I think that anybody and everybody needs to do is to honor their own sacredness, to honor the divinity and the sanctity of the self. And that's a big one, because you need to then really look at all of those flaws that you think you've got, all of those imperfections,
100%.
all that not good enough, rather than realizing I am good enough right now, but that does not mean that I'm finished or that I'm perfect. It's progressive perfection. I am always improving. I am always growing. I am always getting better. That is the flow. That is the thrust of life.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people get caught up in. I'm going to be perfect when this happens, or I'm going to work out. But even if you are at your perfect weight, your perfect shape, you then need to still maintain it. It never stops. So no matter what you do, and including with our minds, we should never stop growing, because once we stop growing, thinking, expanding, that's when we stop. That's when we start the dying process of by not doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's the great tragedy, as I mentioned before, about mass and social media, is that with the power of influencers, most people are looking, or a celebrity, it's somebody else's life, it's somebody else's figure, it's somebody else's body, it's somebody else's success, as opposed to going, no, my life, your life is the most precious gift. And it's accepting the gift of that life and the beauty of that life and really appreciating it. I think the other thing, Dave, that I think is really important is to get to know yourself. If you meet someone, and let's say you fall in love or could be a really good friend, what do you want to do? You want to spend time with that person. You want to hang out with them. You want to get to know them. You want to befriend them. Yet we don't spend time with ourselves. If we're alone, we think, oh, there must be something wrong with me. I've got to turn the television on. I've got to go and see someone. So I think one of the most important things is to spend quality time alone. No devices, no television, no noise. And the corollary of that is to spend time in nature, to allow nature to come in, to allow nature to heal you, to become whole. And so the other point is that's very, very important is that we've been taught that this life is a penance, a suffering, a means to some other end. It's a trial, it's a tribulation, and therefore it's hard, it's a struggle. The Darwinist understanding of evolution is completely at odds to mine, which is survival of the fittest, therefore competition, struggle, a zero-sum game, that we need to fight. If we look at the planet and the wars, it's all about not enough. Pretty much every war throughout history is one empire trying to dominate or plunder or take the wealth from somebody else. The whole of Western society is built on this, the force of greed, because we believe that there is not enough, or that life is this zero-sum game. When you really appreciate the abundance, you've only got to look in the sky, you've only got to look in nature. The universe is abundant. There is always more than enough. I have more than enough time. I have more than enough money. I have more than enough energy. I have more than enough love. So once we get these basic concepts rewired in our brain and in our attitude, our whole outlook changes, and then we can flow. But that's why I call it the Temple of Understanding. There are so many pillars to this misunderstanding where we have been deliberately robbed of our grandeur, of our magnificence. And we need to turn around and really, as I said before, accept the sanctity, the power, the magnificence of who we are as an individual. I think the most important thing to start, maybe to answer your question, is to accept the gift of life. Now, if I give you a gift and it's wrapped in a lovely box with a ribbon and all the rest of it, Christmas and birthday, and you grab that box and put it in the cupboard and don't open it, that's not really appreciating. If you look at a little child, once again, and the way they rip it open, and so to me, life is a gift. Life is the most precious gift that we have. We need to get into that life. We need to open that box and experience life and be one with our own life, rather than being afraid of it or being namby-pamby or being too timid. We need to be, as you said, pick up that bat and have a go at hitting the ball, and have a go at whatever it is that you really want to create in your life. And be bold, be more daring, be more adventurous, be more outgoing, to express your inner truth, not somebody else's. I know I'm trying to cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. I'm trying to give people a few keys to flip the doors of perception, so to allow the magnificence of the universe, the magnificence of our own personal lives, it's a tragedy that most people live very shallow, very fearful, very timid, and very limited lives, when life can be such a grand and glorious adventure. I think that I've devoted my life to, first of all, understanding that, and then going now in my life, in my elder days, to try and give some wisdom to others to turn their lives around.
Yeah, you've given us so much to think about as we start wrapping up, because while we personally might have unlimited time, we don't have unlimited time on the podcast.
No, right now, no.
You've given us so many things to think about, but if we could step into our little magic garden and plant one more seed, what would be something that you'd love to plant today?
Look, I think that the essence is a little thing called be, do, have. Now, most of us in this world, in the Western world, are very focused backwards, meaning we start with have. What do I want to have? And we look at that in terms of possessions rather than qualities. So let's take the basic ones. I want to have wealth. I want to have money. I want to have fame. I want to have success, whatever. But really, we need to start with be, not have. We need to start with who we are. And interestingly, if I want to be wealthy, first of all, I need to be wealthy within myself. It's not about getting possessions. It's about, am I magnanimous? Do I have generosity of spirit? Do I have that wealth consciousness? Health, for example. Okay, I want to have health. So I need to be healthy. I need to have a healthy attitude. I need to look after my body. I need to eat well. So I need to always be, and from that beingness, whereas most of us do because we want to have. Does that make sense? So we're working backwards. Sure. I want to have wealth, so therefore I'm going to go and be whatever. No, I should do in life what is an expression of my beingness, not according to what I want to have, but according to who I am. And if I do that, then I will be authentic, I will be congruent, and I will be successful naturally, because I'm coming from who I am as a human being, as opposed to some ulterior motive about where I want to get to, which is really working the wrong way round.
Right.
And so it doesn't really work.
And that's exactly what the bat really means. It's about being authentic today. That's really what we have to do. And we've spoken about it a few times during this show about it all starts with it within ourselves. And so for myself, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and for your
Yeah.
knowledge today. I can't wait to learn more and dive more into some of the
Yeah.
things that you brought up today, because they always, as I reread and re-listen to the episodes, I always seem to pick up more and more things. So thank you.
Yeah.
How can
Yeah. Well, thank
we
you.
reach out to you? So where would we
Yeah. Well,
reach out to
let me
find
show you. This is the book that will be released in September, Tuning. The best place for people to find me is obviously on my website, adrianemery.com. As I said, I've got a special at the moment for people who join up for the newsletter, which is the 7 Principles of Flow, which gives a PDF. It's fairly concise and explains how to do that. And just before we go, to finish off, I think the most important thing for me is, do you know the word ikigai?
Yes, yes.
Ikigai. So I think that, so for those people who don't, for your listeners who don't know, ikigai is the thing that gets you up in the morning. It's the thing that excites you. It's the thing that you really love to do. And I like to say that when you find your ikigai, there is nowhere else to go. Now, the interesting thing about that, if you look at nowhere, which is NOWHERE, if you move the W, it becomes now here.
Mm,
Do you understand that?
I do.
And what is the W? The W is your why. So if you think of in positive psychology, it's all about the why. Why are you, who are you? Why do you get up in the morning? So move that W, move that why, understand your why, find your ikigai, and then there is nowhere else to go except to be here now, being now.
That's awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
When we listen, I am here and now, and thank you for being here and now as well and explaining all the things that you did to us today.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, and everybody else, as always, wishing you peace and love. And when you bring that back, as we had said, Adrian had said, be authentic today. Be who you are inside, and then it works yourself inside, then it changes the outside. Have a great day and swing for your sweet spot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Well, my friends, today's journey has come to a close. I hope the seeds of peace and love continue to grow for each one of you. Remember, the peace and love surround you that will assist you to rise again. And don't forget to bring a bat for what you believe in. Namaste.